I've always thought that the devil was invisible and hidden. I never knew it was a man, and he was worse than the devil himself. I used to think that the biggest dangers in life came with a loud bang. You know, a crash, a scream, a door being kicked in. But I was wrong. The real danger, well, it's the quiet stuff. It's the way a man can smile at you across a dinner table while he's systematically erasing your bank account. It's the way he calls your daughter sensitive just to make her stop talking. My daughter, Kelly, she's 7. She sees everything, even when she's pretending to play with her dolls. And when she saw me crying over a stack of final notice bills that my new husband, swore he'd paid. She decided to do something. She didn't scream for help. She just picked up a phone and sent a text to a number she thought belonged to her aunt. But it didn't go to her aunt. It went to Liam Kane. People in this city call him a monster. They call him the fixer for the Korean underground. But that day, to a scared little girl with a high bun and a broken heart, he was just the only person who answered. Do you want to know what happened next? Sit tight, hit the subscribe button, and drop the city where you are watching this video from. Drop it in the comments. Now hear how it all began. The air in our house always smelled like expensive sandalwood and anxiety. Yi Jun was a man of perfect creases, perfect suit, perfect hair, perfect lies. When I married him a year after my first husband died in that plane crash, I thought I was buying us safety. I thought I was giving Kelly a father. But lately, the safety felt more like a cage. I was sitting in the kitchen, staring at the rain, wondering how a woman with a master's degree and a significant inheritance could suddenly be confused about where all the money went. That's what Yi Jun called it. Emotional confusion. He'd pat my hand, tell me I was still grieving, and then ask me to sign another power of attorney form. Outside on the porch, I could see Kelly. She was sitting cross-legged, her face set in that deep, serious concentration she gets when she's trying to solve a puzzle. She had an old smartphone in her hands, one with no SIM card, just Wi-Fi. She thought she was texting my sister. She was typing with her thumbs, her little brow furrowed. My stepdad is a bully. Help, Mom. He's taking the money again. She hit send. 3 miles away, in a glass office that looked over the docks, Liam Kane was leaning back in a leather chair. He had a tattoo of a tiger crawling up the side of his neck, disappearing under a crisp white collar. He was a man who dealt in high-stakes debt and uncomfortable resolutions. His phone buzzed on the mahogany desk. He picked it up, expecting a bribe or a threat. Instead, he saw the words of a child. He didn't delete it. He didn't laugh. He just bared his teeth in a snarl, not at the phone, but at the familiar scent of a bully. Liam knew that tone. He'd spent his whole life making sure men like Yi Jun eventually ran out of places to hide. He stood up, grabbed his coat, and let the heavy office door click shut behind him. The game was changing, and for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't the only one playing. The office of Liam Kane sat 40 stories above the city, a sanctuary of glass, shadows, and the kind of silence that felt expensive. Down on the streets, the world was a chaotic mess of sirens and rain, but up here everything was controlled. Liam liked control. He lived by it. To the outside world, he was the fixer, the man you called when a debt couldn't be collected by legal means or when a secret was too heavy for a standard safe. He wasn't a man of many words, and he certainly wasn't a man of many distractions. But for the last 20 minutes, he hadn't looked at the shipping manifests on his screen or the wire transfers waiting for his authorization. He was staring at a burner phone he'd picked up for a job that had ended months ago. It should have been dead. Instead, it was glowing with a notification that shouldn't have existed. My stepdad is a bully. Help, Mom. He's taking the money again. Liam's jaw tightened. He adjusted his cufflink, the movement revealing the edge of the tiger tattoo that crawled up his neck like a warning. He bared his teeth in a slow, subconscious snarl. It wasn't the Mafia boss in him reacting. It was the boy who had grown up in a house where the air felt like broken glass, watching his own mother disappear under the weight of a man who used words like weapons. He didn't delete the message. He didn't toss the phone in the shredder. Instead, he tapped a few keys on his desktop. Within minutes, the digital trail began to unravel. The message had come from a localized Wi-Fi signal in an affluent suburb 3 miles away. A house owned by the late Arthur Vance, now occupied by his widow, Mara, and her new husband, Yi Jun. Yi Jun, Liam muttered, the name tasting like ash. He knew the type. A social climber. A man who wore a three-piece suit like a suit of armor to hide a hollow chest. Liam stood up, his tall frame casting a long shadow over the mahogany desk. He grabbed his overcoat, the heavy wool feeling like a shield. He didn't call his associates. He didn't need a team for this. This wasn't a hit. It was an audit. And Liam Kane was very, very good at math. Ugh. The gala for the City Children's Hospital was a sea of champagne, fake laughter, and the subtle clinking of jewelry that cost more than most people's homes. Liam moved through the crowd like a ghost. He didn't belong here, yet his presence commanded a wide berth. People whispered as he passed, their eyes darting to the floor. He didn't care. He was looking for a specific pair of eyes. He found them near the buffet. Mara was stunning in a way that felt painful to look at. She wore a deep emerald dress that complemented her dark skin, but her shoulders were hunched, pulled inward as if she were trying to occupy as little space as possible. Standing next to her was Yi-jun. He was holding her elbow, not with affection, but with a grip that looked like it was meant to steer a disobedient animal. "You're doing that thing again, Mara," Yi-jun's voice drifted over the noise, smooth and oily. "That blank stare. People are starting to notice. You're making them uncomfortable with your condition. Try to smile. For me." Mara's expression didn't change, but her hand drifted to the small clutch purse she was holding, her fingers twitching. "I'm just tired, Yi-jun. The house accounts. I can't find the records for the..." "SHHH," Yi-jun interrupted, leaning in to kiss her cheek in a way that looked loving from a distance but felt like a threat up close. "We discussed this. You aren't in the right headspace for numbers. Let me handle the heavy lifting. You just focus on looking beautiful. It's the only thing you're actually good at lately, isn't it?" Ugh. Liam watched from behind a marble pillar, his blood turning to ice. He saw the way Mara's eyes dulled. He saw the small, almost invisible tremor in her chin. She wasn't a weak woman. He could see the fire buried under years of exhaustion and grief. She was just a woman who had been told she was drowning for so long that she'd forgotten how to swim. Yi-jun stepped away to talk to a group of bankers, leaving Mara standing alone by a floral arrangement. She looked lost, a ghost in her own life. Liam didn't hesitate. He stepped out of the shadows, his heavy boots silent on the plush carpet. He didn't approach her like a predator. He approached her like a debt collector coming to settle a very specific account. He stopped just a few feet away, his presence drawing her gaze. When she looked at him, he saw the flash of recognition and the flicker of fear. She knew who he was. Everyone in this tax bracket knew to stay away from the man with the tiger on his neck. "It's a loud room," Liam said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to cut through the high-pitched chatter of the gala. "Easy to get lost in the noise." Mara blinked, her hand tightening on her purse. "Mr. Kane, I didn't think you attended these kinds of events." "I don't," Liam replied, his eyes scanning her face with an intensity that made her breath hitch. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper that only she could hear. "But I received a very interesting message today, about a bully, and about some missing money." Mara's face went deathly pale. Her eyes darted toward the porch, where her daughter had been sitting earlier that day, and then back to Liam. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her daughter hadn't texted her sister. She had texted him. "She's just a child," Mara whispered, her voice trembling. "She didn't know. Please, she's innocent. If my husband finds out, she reached out to someone like you." "Someone like me?" Liam cut her off, a grim shadow of a smile touching his lips. "You mean someone who knows how to spot a thief? Someone who knows that your husband is currently liquidated 30% of your late husband's estate into offshore accounts, while you're standing here apologizing for being tired." Ugh. Mara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The noise around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of harsh, cold reality. How do you know that?" she breathed. "I'm a fixer, Mara," Liam said, his gaze shifting to Yi-jun, who was laughing with a group of men across the room. "And your life is currently very, very broken. I don't care about your husband's social standing. I don't care about his perfect reputation. I care about the fact that a 7-year-old girl is the only person in this city brave enough to tell the truth." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, silver business card. It had no name, just a single phone number embossed on the front. He tucked it into the fold of her clutch purse, his fingers brushing hers for a brief, electric second. "He's coming back," Liam noted, his eyes tracking Yi-jun's movement. "When he gets home tonight, he's going to ask you for your signature on a new set of investment papers. Don't sign them. Tell him you have a headache. Tell him you're confused again. Buy me 24 hours. "Why are you doing this?" Mara asked, her voice a mixture of hope and terror. "What's the catch? People like you don't do things for free." Liam looked at her, and for a split second, the Mafia mask slipped. She saw a man who looked tired. A man who looked like he was carrying a debt of his own that could never be repaid. "You're right," he said softly. "I'm not doing this for free. I'm doing this because I want to see the look on his face when he realizes he picked the wrong family to ruin." Yi-jun reappeared, sliding an arm around Mara's waist with a possessive tug. He looked at Liam, his eyes narrowing with a mixture of arrogance and curiosity. "Is there a problem here, Mr. Kane?" Yi-jun asked, his voice dripping with forced politeness. Liam didn't flinch. He straightened his coat, his eyes locking onto Yi-jun's with a predatory stillness that made the younger man's smile falter. "No problem," Liam said, his voice cold and final. "Just discussing an investment opportunity. I think your wife is starting to see the value in better protection." Without another word, Liam turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd as quickly as he had appeared. Mara stood there, the weight of the silver card in her purse feeling like a mountain. She looked at Yi-jun, really looked at him, and for the first time in a year she didn't feel like a victim. She felt like a storm was coming, and for once she wasn't the one who had to be afraid of the rain. The drive home was a lesson in suffocating silence. Yi-jun sat in the driver's seat of the sleek, black sedan, his fingers tapping a rhythmic, impatient beat against the leather-wrapped steering wheel. He didn't ask what Liam Kane had said to me. He didn't ask if I was okay. To him, I was a decorative asset that had briefly malfunctioned by talking to the wrong person. "I don't like him, Mara," Yi-jun said finally, his voice cutting through the hum of the tires on the wet pavement. "Kane is a thug with a tailor. He's the kind of man who thrives on the misfortune of others. You shouldn't have engaged him. It reflects poorly on our stability." I looked out the window, watching the streetlights blur into long, golden streaks. Stability. It was his favorite word. It was the velvet shroud he used to cover the fact that he was bleeding me dry. I felt the silver card pressed against my thigh through the fabric of my dress. It felt hot, dangerous. "He was just being polite, Yi-jun," I lied, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. "He mentioned a business venture, nothing more." Yi-jun let out a sharp, mocking exhale. "Business? Right. Well, speaking of business, I need you to look at those restructuring papers for the Vance Trust tonight. I've managed to pivot the assets into a high-yield venture in Seoul. It'll secure Kelly's tuition for the next decade." He said her name like a bargaining chip. In the past, that mention of Kelly's future would have made me reach for the pen immediately. Tonight, it made my stomach turn. When we arrived at the house, the lights were low. Our nanny, a soft-spoken woman named Alara, was waiting by the door. She whispered that Kelly was asleep, but I knew better. As I walked past her room, I saw the sliver of light beneath her door. I slipped inside. Kelly was sitting cross-legged on her bed, her hair still in that high bun, her eyes wide and alert. She didn't have her phone. She just had a stuffed tiger, a gift from her father years ago, clutched to her chest. "Mom," she whispered. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled her into my arms. She smelled like baby shampoo and a lingering hint of the garden. "You did a very brave thing today, Kelly," I murmured into her hair. "But you have to promise me. No more messages, not to anyone. Okay." "Is the man going to help?" she asked, her voice tiny. I thought of Liam's eyes, the way they hadn't looked at me with pity, but with a cold, calculating recognition of justice. I think he's going to try." I left her room and found Yi-jun in the study. He had the papers spread out on the mahogany desk, a glass of expensive scotch at his elbow. The room smelled of that sandalwood I had grown to hate. It was the scent of my own disappearance. "Here," he said, sliding a heavy fountain pen toward me. "Just on the blue tabs, Mara. Then we can put all this stress behind us." I looked at the blue tabs. They represented the last of Arthur's legacy. If I signed these, I'd be entirely dependent on the man standing over me. I remembered Liam's voice. Tell him you have a headache. Buy me 24 hours. I can't tonight, Yi-jun, I said, rubbing my temples. The lights at the gala. I have a migraine starting. Everything is blurry. I can't even read the fine print. Yi-jun's face darkened. The mask of the caring husband slipped just enough for me to see the predator underneath. Mara, this is time-sensitive. The markets don't wait for your headaches. I know, I said, backing toward the door. But my lawyer, the one Arthur appointed, always told me never to sign when I'm not clear-headed. I'll do it first thing in the morning, I promise. I didn't wait for his response. I turned and walked to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. At 2 a.m., the burner phone Liam had given me vibrated under my pillow. There was no text, just a coordinate and a time. 3:30 a.m., the pier at 4th Street. I changed into dark jeans and a nondescript hoodie. I felt like a criminal in my own home. I checked on Kelly one last time, then slipped out through the kitchen's side door, avoiding the security cameras Yi-jun had installed for our safety. The pier was deserted, shrouded in a thick, salty fog that muffled the sound of the waves. A single set of headlights cut through the gloom. A heavy, dark SUV was parked at the very edge of the wood-planked dock. Liam was leaning against the hood, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. He looked different out here, less like a businessman and more like the tiger on his neck. Gritty, lethal. You're late, he said, flicking the cigarette into the water. I had to make sure he was asleep, I replied, my breath visible in the cold air. He tried to make me sign the papers tonight. I stalled him, but he's suspicious. Liam nodded, reaching into the SUV and pulling out a thick manila folder. He should be. I started moving against his shell companies an hour ago. I've frozen the accounts he thought were hidden in the Cayman Islands. He's going to wake up to a financial heart attack. He handed me the folder. I opened it and my breath caught. It wasn't just bank statements. It was a contract. This is a relationship of convenience, Mara, Liam said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. To the world, I am now your primary creditor. I've bought your husband's debts. Legally, he owes me now, but for this to work, for me to stay in your house and dismantle him from the inside, you have to agree to a partnership. I'm not a bodyguard and I'm not a charity. I looked at the terms. He wanted access to the Vance Trust's primary board. He wanted to use my name to legitimize some of his own holdings. It was a trade. My freedom for his reputation. You're using me, I whispered. I'm using you to win a war we both want to fight, Liam corrected. You get your life back. You get your money back, and Kelly grows up in a house where she doesn't have to hide her phone to feel safe. In exchange, I get a seat at a table that has been closed to men like me for a long time. I looked at him, really looked at him. There was no lie in his eyes. He wasn't pretending to love me. He wasn't pretending to be a hero. He was offering a deal. It was the most honest thing a man had said to me in years. What happens if we fail? I asked. Liam stepped closer, the smell of rain and tobacco surrounding me. He reached out, his thumb grazing the line of my jaw, a gesture that felt more like a vow than a caress. I don't fail, Mara, he said. Because if I do, I lose everything too. We're in the same boat now. I suggest we start rowing. I took the pen he offered and signed the bottom of the contract. The ink was black, bold, and final. Welcome to the firm, Mr. Kane, I said. The corner of his mouth twitched. Go home, get some sleep. Tomorrow morning I'm coming over for breakfast, and your husband is going to hate what I have on the menu. The morning light in the breakfast nook was always too bright, too clinical. It felt like an interrogation room where the only crime was my own existence. Yi-jun was sitting at the head of the table, his tablet propped up against a pitcher of orange juice. He looked different. There was a slight tremor in his hand as he scrolled through his emails. The financial heart attack Liam promised had clearly begun its work. Mara, he snapped, not looking up. Why is the primary Vance account showing a temporary freeze? I tried to authorize the transfer to Seoul this morning, and it was flagged for unauthorized third-party oversight. Did you call the bank? I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. For the first time, the bitterness didn't bother me. I told you, Yi-jun, I was confused. I might have clicked a security alert in my email last night. My head was pounding. I couldn't really see what I was doing. He slammed the tablet onto the table, the noise echoing through the kitchen. Kelly flinched, her spoon hovering halfway to her mouth. I reached over and squeezed her hand under the table. You clicked something. Do you have any idea how much? The doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite chime. It was a heavy, rhythmic thud that demanded to be answered. Ugh. Yi-jun stood up, smoothing his silk robe, his face a mask of irritation. Who the hell is that at 8 in the morning? He opened the door, and the air in the house seemed to shift. Liam Kane didn't wait to be invited in. He stepped into the foyer, wearing a charcoal suit that looked like it was woven from shadows. He looked bigger than he had at the pier, more permanent. Behind him, 2 men in nondescript black suits stood on the porch, their eyes hidden behind dark glass. Mr. Yi-jun, Liam said, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. I believe we have an appointment. Yi-jun's face went through a fascinating transformation, from anger to confusion to a pale, sickly shade of gray. Kane, what are you doing here? This is a private residence. Not anymore, Liam replied, walking past him and straight into the kitchen. He looked at me, his eyes lingering for just a second too long to be business, before he turned his attention to the table. He pulled out a chair and sat down as if he owned the foundation the house was built on. I've spent the morning reviewing the debts you've accrued in the city's private markets, Yi-jun. It turns out you've been using your wife's estate as collateral for some very poorly managed gambles. Yi-jun rushed back into the room, his voice shaking. I don't owe you anything, whatever you think you have on me. I know, Liam interrupted, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table. It was the contract I had signed at the pier, but with a new attachment, a legal notice of debt acquisition. I bought your liabilities from the firms in Singapore and Macau. As of 6 o'clock this morning, I am your primary lien holder. Every penny you spend, every breath you take in this house, is technically on my balance sheet. He turned to Kelly, his expression softening by a fraction of a percent. Is that the tiger your mom told me about? Kelly nodded, her eyes wide as saucers. She didn't look scared. She looked at the man with the tiger on his neck and then at me. She saw the way I was sitting, shoulders back, chin up. She saw the change. Yi-jun looked like he was going to vibrate out of his skin. This is a setup. Mara, you did this. You brought this criminal into our home. I stood up, clearing my plate with a deliberate, slow grace. I brought a fixer, Yi-jun. Since you told me I was too confused to handle the money, I thought it was only fair to bring in a professional to help us both. Mr. Kane has agreed to stay here, in the guest suite, until our finances are stabilized. The word stabilized hit Yi-jun like a physical slap. You can't stay here, Yi-jun hissed at Liam. Liam leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. The power dynamic in the room didn't just shift, it shattered. I can, and I will. Think of me as a permanent auditor. I'll be watching every transaction, every gift you buy yourself, and every time you raise your voice to your family. Liam looked at the burnt toast on Yi-jun's plate and then up at the man himself. You should leave the house for the day, Yi-jun. Go find a way to explain to your investors why their money is gone. I'd like to have a quiet morning with my new clients. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the sound of Yi-jun's ragged breathing and the distant chirp of birds outside. For the first time in 2 years, the sandalwood smell was being drowned out by the scent of rain and cold iron. Yi-jun grabbed his keys and bolted out the door, the sound of his tires screeching on the driveway acting as the first true note of justice. I sat back down, my legs finally giving way to the adrenaline. Liam looked at me, his gaze intense and unreadable. He's going to try to fight back, I whispered. Liam reached for a piece of fruit from the bowl, his movements calm and predatory. Let him try. It's hard to fight when you're standing on a trapdoor, and I'm the one with my hand on the lever. The guest suite at the end of the hall had always been a cold, empty place, a showroom for guests we never actually invited. Now, it was the nerve center of a war. Liam had moved in with nothing but a single duffel bag and a workstation that looked like it belonged in a government dark site. The house was quiet. Yi-jun hadn't come home yet, likely drowning his ego in a bottle of expensive bourbon at his club. I stood at the door of the suite, watching Liam. He was hunched over a laptop, the blue light of the screen carving deep lines into his face. The tiger on his neck seemed to pulse with every movement of his jaw. "You should be sleeping," he said without looking up. "I can't," I replied, stepping into the room. "The silence is too loud. It feels like the calm before. Well, you know." Liam finally turned, his chair creaking. He didn't offer a platitude, he just tapped the screen. "Come here, Mara, I found something, and it's not just about the money." I walked over, leaning down to look at the rows of data. It was a maintenance log from a private aviation hangar, the one that had serviced Arthur's plane before the crash. My heart skipped a beat. Just seeing Arthur's name in print made the grief flare up, a sharp, cold ache in my chest. "I tracked the shell company that bought the hangar 3 months before the accident," Liam said, his voice dropping to a low, steady hum. "The ownership is buried under 4 layers of offshore proxies, but I followed the wire transfers. The seed money for the acquisition didn't come from a bank." He scrolled down, highlighting a series of payments. "It came from a private account belonging to Yi-jun. Specifically, an account he opened using a forged signature of yours, while you were still in the hospital recovering from the shock of the news." I felt the floor drop out from under me. I had to grab the edge of the desk to keep from falling. "You're saying..." "Ugh. He didn't just marry me for the money, he cleared the path to get it." "Ugh." Liam stood up, his presence filling the small room. He didn't reach out to touch me. He knew I was brittle, that a single touch might shatter the composure I was fighting to keep. Instead, he stood like a wall between me and the horror on the screen. "The logs show a routine inspection was bypassed 48 hours before takeoff," Liam explained. "The lead mechanic suddenly retired to a villa in Spain a week later. Yi-jun didn't just find you in your grief, Mara. He manufactured it." The room felt like it was spinning. I thought of every time Yi-jun had held me while I cried. Every time he told me to trust him because he was the only one who truly cared. It wasn't just a scam, it was a slow-motion execution. "I'm going to kill him," I whispered, the words sounding foreign and sharp in my own ears. "No," Liam said, his voice as hard as flint. "You're going to dismantle him. Killing is quick. What we're doing. We're going to strip him of his name, his assets, and his freedom. We're going to make sure that when he leaves this house, he has nothing but the clothes on his back and the knowledge that he lost to the woman he thought was too confused to fight back." I looked up at him, the tears finally starting to burn my eyes. "Why are you helping me like this? This isn't just about a business seat anymore. This is. It's too much work for a simple trade." Liam looked away, his gaze fixing on the rain-streaked window. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the storm. "My sister," he said quietly. "She married a man like Yi-jun, a charming businessman who slowly erased her until she didn't recognize herself in the mirror. I was young. I was angry. I tried to handle it with the things people say I do. I made it worse. He took her away before I could fix it." He turned back to me, his eyes dark with a decade of unspoken regret. "I couldn't save her, but I can save you, and I can save Kelly. This is the only kind of justice I believe in anymore." I reached out then, my fingers grazing the rough fabric of his sleeve. It wasn't a romantic gesture, it was a tether. We were 2 broken people using the shards of our pasts to build a weapon. "What do we do next?" I asked. Liam's mouth thinned into a predatory line. "We stop looking at the past. Tomorrow, we go for his jugular. We're going to find that mechanic in Spain." The atmosphere in the house had shifted from a Cold War to a calculated siege. Yi-jun was unraveling. He spent his nights packing the study, the clink of ice against glass a constant reminder of his mounting desperation. He knew Liam was in the house, but he couldn't kick him out, not without acknowledging the predatory debts he'd signed away in his greed. Liam and I moved through the hallways like synchronized shadows. We didn't need to speak much anymore. There was a frequency we both occupied now. Every morning, I would hand him a fresh set of internal memos, and every evening, he would show me a new piece of the puzzle he'd extracted from the mechanic in Spain. "He's biting," Liam whispered one afternoon. We were in the kitchen, ostensibly discussing the grocery list, but the paper I held was a map of Yi-jun's final move. "He's trying to liquidate the last of the Vance Trust's physical holdings, The downtown real estate. He needs cash to flee, Mara. He knows the walls are closing in. I felt a surge of cold adrenaline. If he sells those buildings, the foundation Arthur built is gone. We can't let him sign those deeds over. He won't, Liam said, his voice a low, soothing rasp. Because he thinks he's selling them to a private equity group out of Dubai. In reality, he's meeting with my associates. He thinks he's getting a lifeline. He's actually walking into a vault. The plan was a high-stakes dinner. Yi-jun had insisted on hosting it at the house, a desperate attempt to reclaim his status as the man of the manor. He wanted to show these foreign investors that he was still in control. He had no idea that every person sitting at that table would be a legal operative handpicked by Liam. The night of the dinner, the house was transformed. Caterers moved through the dining room, the smell of roasted lamb and expensive wine filling the air. Yi-jun was in his element, wearing a suit that cost more than a small car, his face flushed with the false confidence of a man who thinks he's about to win. I stood at the top of the stairs, watching him hold court. Kelly was in her room, safely tucked away with Alara, but I could feel her presence, the reason I was doing this. Liam appeared at my side. He wasn't in a suit this time. He was in a dark, high-collared coat that made him look like a judge from a different century. "You ready?" he asked. "My hands won't stop shaking," I admitted, tucking them into the folds of my silk dress. Liam stepped closer, his shadow overlapping mine. "That's not fear, Mara. That's power. You've been the prey for 2 years. Tonight, you're the one holding the leash, just remember. Stay quiet. Let him talk. Let him dig the holes so deep he can't see the sky." The dinner was a masterclass in deception. Yi-jun laughed too loudly, bragged too much about his portfolio, and looked at me with a patronizing pity whenever I spoke. The investors, 3 men and 1 woman with eyes like sharks, nodded and smiled, led by a man named Elias who Liam had worked with for years. "The terms are simple, Yi-jun," Elias said, sliding a thick leather folder across the table. "We take the downtown properties off your hands for 50 million cash, but the transfer has to be total. No lingering board seats, no family oversight. Clean break." Yi-jun's eyes practically glowed with greed. "A clean break is exactly what we're looking for. My wife has found the management of these assets. Taxing on her health. Isn't that right, darling?" I looked at him across the table. I saw the man who had tampered with a plane. I saw the man who had stolen my peace. "Taxing isn't the word I'd use, Yi-jun," I said softly. "But I agree. A clean break is exactly what we deserve." Yi-jun reached for the fountain pen in his pocket. He didn't even read the final page. He was so focused on the exit, so focused on the money, that he didn't notice the way the investors all looked at Liam at the head of the table. He pressed the nib to the paper, the ink flowing in a dark, jagged line. He signed his name with a flourish, then pushed the folder back toward Elias. "Done," Yi-jun said, letting out a long, relieved breath. "Now about the wire transfer." "There won't be a wire transfer, Yi-jun," Liam interrupted. The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the wind rattling the window pane. Yi-jun's smile didn't fall. It simply froze, like a mask that had been cracked. "What?" Yi-jun stammered. "Kane, what are you talking about? The contract?" "The contract you just signed," Liam said, standing up slowly, "wasn't a sale. It was a full confession of financial fraud and a voluntary divestment of all rights to the Vance estate, triggered by the evidence of your involvement in the mechanical failure of Arthur Vance's aircraft." Yi-jun's face went from pale to a terrifying, bruised purple. He looked at the folder, then at me, his eyes wide with a sudden, violent realization. He reached for the papers, but Elias was faster, snapping the folder shut. You set me up," Yi-jun hissed, his gaze fixated on me. He stood up, his chair clattering to the floor. "You think this holds up? You think this fixer and a confused widow can take me down?" He moved toward me, his hand raised in a gesture of pure, unadulterated rage. I didn't move. I didn't blink, because before he could take a single step, Liam was there. Liam didn't hit him. He didn't have to. He just caught Yi-jun's wrist in a grip that looked like it could crush bone. He leaned in, his voice a whisper that carried the weight of a death sentence. "The police are in the driveway, Yi-jun. And unlike me, they have to follow the rules. I suggest you go with them quietly, because if you don't, well, I've got a lot of ways to spend the night that don't involve a jail cell. Ugh. The dining room, which only moments ago felt like a stage for a high society play, now felt like a cage. Yi-jun's breathing was shallow and ragged, the sound of a man who had run out of air. He looked at the silver-haired investors who were now standing in a semicircle around him, their faces devoid of the warmth they had faked during dinner. They weren't businessmen. They were the witnesses to his funeral. Mara, listen to me, Yi-jun said, his voice cracking, shedding the polished veneer he'd worn for years. He tried to pull his wrist from Liam's iron grip, but Liam didn't budge. You're being manipulated. This man. He's a criminal. He's using your grief to steal what I've spent 2 years trying to protect for you. I walked toward him, my heels clicking softly on the hardwood. I stopped just inches away, looking into the eyes of the man I had once shared a bed with. I didn't see a husband. I didn't even see a villain. I saw a small, desperate thief who had finally been caught in a house he didn't own. You didn't protect me, Yi-jun, I said, my voice low and vibrating with a decade's worth of suppressed truth. You erased me. You stood by while I buried Arthur, knowing you were the one who loosened the bolts on his life. You watched me cry for a year and called it headspace, while you moved my daughter's future into a bank account in the Caymans. Ugh. I reached out and slowly unpinned the silk boutonniere from his lapel, the one I had picked out for him before the dinner. I let it drop to the floor. The only person confused in this room is you. You thought I was a prize to be looted, but a house built on a grave always collapses, Yi-jun, and your time is up. Yi-jun's face contorted. The charming husband was gone, replaced by a snarling, panicked animal. He lunged, not at Liam, but at me, his fingers clawing for the folder Elias held. Liam didn't even break a sweat. He pivoted, using Yi-jun's own momentum to slam him back against the mahogany table. The fine china rattled and shattered, a crystal wine glass tipping over and spilling dark red liquid across the white lace tablecloth. It looked like blood. Stay down, Liam growled, his voice vibrating in the very floorboards. You've done enough talking for one lifetime. Ugh. The front door opened, and the cold night air rushed into the foyer. 4 police officers entered, led by a detective Liam had tipped off hours ago. They didn't come in with guns drawn. They didn't need to. They came in with a folder of their own, filled with the forensic evidence Liam's team had gathered from the mechanic's confession in Spain and the digital trail of the forged power of attorney. Yi-jun Park? The detective asked, his voice flat and professional. You're under arrest for grand larceny, financial fraud, and we're bringing you in for questioning regarding the death of Arthur Vance. As the handcuffs clicked shut, a cold, metallic sound that felt like the final period at the end of a long, dark sentence, Yi-jun looked at me one last time. There was no remorse in his eyes, only a bitter, poisonous hatred. You'll be nothing without me, Mara, he screamed as they led him toward the door. You're just a widow in a big, empty house. You'll rot here. Ugh. The door slammed shut, cutting off his voice. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't the suffocating silence of the last 2 years. It was the silence of a room that had finally been cleared of smoke. I stood there, staring at the shattered glass on the table. My knees began to shake, the adrenaline finally leaving my system and leaving a hollow, aching exhaustion in its place. Liam was suddenly there, his presence a solid, grounding weight behind me. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't ask for his payment. He just reached out and placed a hand on my shoulder, a brief, firm pressure that said, "You can breathe now." "He's gone, Mara," Liam said softly. "The bully is gone." Ugh. I turned to him, the tears finally spilling over, hot and silent. I thought I'd feel happy, but I just feel empty. "That's because the house is yours again," Liam replied, his eyes searching mine with an intensity that made my heart ache for a different reason. "And emptiness is just another word for a fresh start. You can put whatever you want in here now." From the top of the stairs, a small voice drifted down. "Mom, is it over?" I looked up to see Kelly, her stuffed tiger tucked under her arm, watching us from the shadows. I wiped my face and held out my arms. She ran down the stairs, past the broken glass and the spilled wine, and buried her face in my lap. I looked at Liam over her head. He was standing by the window, the tiger on his neck illuminated by the flashing blue lights of the police cars outside. He looked like he was ready to leave, to disappear back into the shadows where men like him lived. "Don't go yet," I whispered. Liam paused, his hand on the doorframe. He didn't look back, but he didn't leave either. "The job is done, Mara. You don't owe me anything." "I know," I said, holding Kelly tighter. "That's why I'm asking." Ugh. The house felt twice as large the next morning. Without the heavy, suffocating scent of sandalwood and the constant, unspoken pressure of Yi-jun's presence, the rooms seemed to stretch out, blinking in the sunlight. The forensic teams and the police had left hours ago, taking their clipboards and their questions with them. Ugh. I spent the morning in a trance, moving through the dining room. I swept up the shards of the crystal wine glass myself. I didn't want the maid to do it. I needed to feel the grit of the wreckage. I needed to see the stains on the tablecloth fade under the cold water. It was a baptism of sorts. Every piece of glass I threw away felt like a fragment of the lie I'd been living. Liam hadn't left. He was out on the back porch, leaning against the railing with a cup of black coffee. He looked tired, not the kind of tired that comes from a lack of sleep, but the kind that comes from carrying a weight for too long. I stepped out into the crisp morning air, hugging my cardigan close to my chest. "Kelly is still sleeping," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "It's the first time she hasn't woken up with a nightmare in 6 months." Liam didn't turn around, but I saw his shoulders relax just a fraction. "Kids are resilient," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They just need to know the floor isn't going to fall out from under them. She's safe now, Mara. The accounts are locked. The lawyers are already filing the papers to annul the marriage based on the fraud. By next week, his name will be a footnote in your history." Ugh. I walked over to the railing, standing a few feet away from him. We watched the gardener prune the hedges at the edge of the estate. It was so mundane, so normal. "And what about you, Liam? You said the job was done. Is this where you go back to your office and wait for the next broken life to fix?" Liam finally looked at me. The harsh morning light didn't do him any favors. It showed the scar near his temple and the exhaustion in his eyes. But it also made him look human, not like a fixer, not like a Mafia ghost, just a man. "My office isn't exactly a place people go to find peace, Mara," he said, a ghost of a smirk playing on his lips. "I've spent a long time being the man people are afraid of. It's a hard habit to break." "Maybe you don't have to break it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Maybe you just have to use it for the right reasons." Ugh. He looked at me for a long beat, his gaze searching mine. I didn't turn away. I wanted him to see the gratitude, but more than that, I wanted him to see the choice. I wasn't the grieving widow anymore, and I wasn't a strategic partner. I was a woman who had been saved by a man's refusal to look away from a child's plea. "I found your sister's name," I said softly, "in the files you left on the desk, Sora." Liam's hand tightened on his coffee cup. The silence that followed was long and heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of shared understanding. "She would have liked you," he said finally. "She always had a thing for people who fought back." Ugh. Later that afternoon, I found Kelly in the garden. She was sitting in the dirt, her pink t-shirt stained with soil, carefully planting a row of marigolds. Liam was standing a few feet away, awkwardly holding a trowel as if it were a foreign weapon. He wasn't helping exactly, but he was there. He was an anchor. "Look, Mom," Kelly shouted, pointing at the tiny green sprouts. "Mr. Liam says if we water them every day, the bully won't ever come back. He says bullies hate flowers." I looked at Liam. He looked profoundly uncomfortable, his dark suit completely out of place against the vibrant green of the lawn. But when he looked at Kelly, the snarl he usually wore was completely gone. "I didn't say that exactly," Liam muttered, though he didn't move away. "I said they hate things they can't control, and you can't control a garden. It grows how it wants." Ugh. I realized then that justice wasn't just about handcuffs and courtrooms. It was about this. It was about the ability to stand in your own yard and not wonder if the person next to you is dreaming of your ruin. "Stay for dinner, Liam," I said. "No business, no ledgers, just dinner." Liam looked at the house, then back at the garden. He looked like a man standing at a crossroads, deciding whether to go back into the dark or see what the light felt like for a little while longer. I'm not very good at small talk, he warned. That's okay, I smiled, feeling a genuine warmth in my chest for the first time in years. We've had enough big talk to last a lifetime. 6 months can be a lifetime if you're building something from the ground up. The Vance Foundation didn't just survive the scandal, it thrived. We moved the headquarters out of that cold glass skyscraper and into a refurbished brick building downtown, a place with big windows and open doors. I spent my days ensuring that other women who felt the way I used to feel, had a place to go when the quiet danger started to creep into their homes. Justice had been served in the most literal sense. Yi Jun was currently serving a 15-year sentence for a litany of white-collar crimes and the conspiracy charges related to Arthur's death. He was a memory now, a shadow that no longer had the power to dim the lights in our house. But the real success wasn't in the courtrooms or the bank balances. It was in the kitchen on a Tuesday evening. Liam was standing at the counter, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing the full length of the tiger tattoo. He wasn't looking at a ledger or a burner phone. He was focused, with that same intense concentration he applied to everything, on chopping vegetables for a stew. "You're cutting those too small," I said, leaning against the island watching him. "They'll turn to mush." Liam paused, the knife hovering over a carrot. He looked at the pile, then at me, a rare, genuine spark of amusement in his dark eyes. "I'm a precision-oriented person, Mara. You knew this when you invited me over." "I invited you for dinner, not for a surgical procedure," I teased, reaching over to take the knife from his hand. Our fingers brushed, and the electric jolt that had once been born of fear was now entirely grounded in something deeper. Something chosen. We had moved past the relationship of convenience long ago. There were no more debts to settle, no more secrets to uncover. Liam had stepped back from the darker corners of his world, turning his fixer skills toward a private security and consulting firm that helped nonprofits navigate the very risks he used to manage. He didn't have to be here. He didn't have to check on the locks or help Kelly with her math homework. He chose to. And I chose him, not because I needed a shield, but because I wanted a partner who had seen my lowest point and didn't think I was confused or weak. "Mom, look!" Kelly burst into the kitchen, a drawing clutched in her hand. She was taller now, her hair styled in 2 neat puffs, her face glowing with the kind of unburdened joy that only safety can provide. She slammed the paper onto the counter. It was a drawing of the 3 of us in the garden. She had drawn Liam with his tiger tattoo, but she'd added a little orange flower behind the tiger's ear. Liam picked up the drawing, studying it with the same gravity he used to study a multi-million-dollar contract. "The flower is a nice touch," he murmured, his voice softening. "It's because you're a softie now," Kelly giggled, poking his arm before running off to find her shoes. Liam watched her go, a quiet smile finally breaking across his face. It was a look that would have shocked the people who used to fear him. "She's getting too fast for me," he said, turning back to me. "She's just happy, Liam," I said, stepping into his space. I placed my hands on his chest, feeling the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart. "We both are." He put his hands on my waist, pulling me closer. The smell of rain and cold iron was gone, replaced by the scent of home, garlic, wood smoke, and the perfume I'd chosen for myself. "I spent my whole life thinking the only way to survive was to be the person everyone was afraid of," Liam whispered, his forehead resting against mine. "I didn't think there was a place for a man like me, in a life like this." "There's a place for anyone brave enough to answer a message from a little girl," I replied. "You didn't just fix my life, Liam, you joined it." Justice isn't just about punishing the bad man. It's about what happens after the sirens fade. It's about the conscious choice to stay, to build, and to love without a hidden agenda. As the sun set over the garden, casting long, golden shadows across the floor, I realized that the bully hadn't just lost his money or his freedom. He'd lost the power to define us. We weren't a widow and a fixer anymore. We were a family, and for the first time in my life, I knew exactly where I was supposed to be.